So this workshop is for both students who are interested in applying to the United States, but also to the United Kingdom. We're going to talk about personal statements, which are common between both countries, and then also talk about essays, which are more common in the US. You don't run into those really in the UK. So basically, just to follow up with university research, if you are interested in these countries, I do want to push you that you're working on this research as much as you can. You're coming to see your counselor when you run into problems. One of the best ways to know what you have to do over the next few months is to make sure you're choosing your universities. So for the UK, you've got your 5 university choices. For the US, there's no real limitation, but each one will have slightly different requirements in terms of averages, in terms of essays or personal statements, and in terms of additional testing that you may need to do. So it's really important to be working on these applications now, choosing your universities now, so that you don't run into any problems later on if you haven't given yourself enough time to complete all of the requirements. There we go. So here's our contact information again. Hopefully you have seen this many times. If you haven't seen your counselor already, you're more than welcome to stop by our office and book an appointment. You can also send me an email if you'd like as well. I like to try to talk to my students, especially those who are applying to the UK, because I'm in charge of your applications. For the US, you're welcome to talk to me as well, but you can also talk with your own counselor too. We all handle applications for the US. Okay, so some follow-up. Like I said, 5 choices. In those choices, you want to be strategic about what you're choosing. 2 goal schools, 2 kind of middle-of-the-road universities, and then at least 1 backup. For the US, anywhere between 5 and 10 is good. Keep in mind if you're also applying to Canadian universities, because if you're doing 5 UK, 10 US, 10 for Canada, this is getting a little bit crazy. Keep in mind, for every application that you do, you'll have to do follow-up for all of the universities. It's very time-consuming. So we normally recommend about 5 to 10 overall. If you want to do multiple countries, you may have to do slightly more than that, but try not to do too much. Oftentimes, students find themselves overwhelmed by this. It's too much, it's too time-consuming, and then they feel that they can't spend the necessary time and energy on each application. So they feel that they don't do a good enough job. So sometimes it's better to scale back a little bit and do a really good job on those applications that you can complete. And again, same thing, at least 2 goals, 2 in the middle, and 1 backup. There we go. Okay, so if anybody has any questions regarding the university research, you need any help, make sure you're referring to your handouts. They do actually have quite a bit of information in them. I spend a lot of time on them to try to make sure they contain as much as I can think of. But like I said, make sure you come and talk with your counselor in person. It's one of the best ways to get the answers for what you're looking for. So, today, there we go. We're going to talk about types of essays, how important the essays are, some do's and don'ts. It's just some tips with the essays. We're going to talk a little bit about British English versus American English. This is something that's a little bit important to consider when you're writing for a different kind of audience. Canadian English, of course, falls somewhere right in the middle, so that's nice and confusing. And a little bit of the differences between the US and the UK in terms of the application and specifically the personal statements and essays. And of course, where to find some more help. I've got a lot of resources in this workshop. We're going to watch a video. I've got a lot of links towards the end of your handout. So definitely take advantage of those. There's more videos at the end. There's some YouTube stuff. It's really helpful information, and it's also really good to get the information from another perspective. So you have my perspective from working here at CIC from a Canadian perspective, but we'll watch a video from UCAS. So it's actually the people who are taking your application and making those decisions that are giving you this feedback. And I have a few links in your handout as well to universities in the US and their perspective on it. So it's helpful to get everybody's perspective so that when you're writing, you can kind of take everybody's opinions and put them together. So, types of essays, we talked a little bit about this ahead of time, so I won't go into too much detail here. Okay, so you have the creative ones. These are not as common. You don't run into these as often. Most essays are fairly straightforward. They're asking about you, they're asking about your life experience, your personal experience, why you're interested in the program. But sometimes you do get universities that decide to ask you just kind of an oddball question. So these are questions that could still be about you, but are usually just not your traditional options. So sometimes you're going to be asked to answer a specific question. Like a good example from actually a Canadian university, McMaster for one of their programs maybe 4 years ago, asked students, why? And then you had to write 1,500 characters about that. Obviously this is a very open-ended question. There's not an obvious answer to that, and that was the point. You could take this in millions of different directions, but the university wanted to see what you would do with it. They could ask you something like, what is an act of folly? And so it's something that you have to look up. Well, I don't know, what's folly? And then you have to write your own opinion on things. They could ask for your opinion on a current event or a current issue going on right now. It could really literally be about anything. So this is a pretty common one. So reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? So this is actually an example from Common App from last year. It may even be still on there right now. So far it looks like it. But this is an idea of a creative essay just because you don't necessarily have to talk about your extracurriculars, about your interest in your program or anything. You can talk about something that's very personal to yourself. So if you challenged a belief or idea at any point in your life, this could be within your family, within your school, within your friend group, they want you to start thinking about these big ideas. And they want to see how you respond to a question that you're maybe not all that prepared for. So a personal statement, again, more common USA and UK. This is purely about you, your accomplishments, your goal, why you're a good fit for the university. It's more formal and it's less customized to a specific question for yourself. So it could be a very broad question. But they are definitely more formal. They have more of a formal structure about what you want to talk about, the points that you want to make, and how you're going to express yourself to the university. So here's an example. So tell us why you're interested in your chosen course or program, why you're interested in studying in the UK or the US, and how your chosen course or program will help you reach your goals. So this is technically one question, but it's actually asking you quite a few questions, and you have to make sure that you're hitting all of them, because that's what they're looking for. So not only that you answer some of the questions well, but that you're answering all of them. So why are you interested in your chosen course or program? Question number 1. Why are you interested in studying in the UK? Question 2. What are your goals? Because to determine how your program will help you reach the goals, you have to establish what those goals are. And question 4 is how will the chosen course or program let you reach your goals? So there's kind of like a secret question in there where they don't specifically say, tell us your goals, but you have to in order to answer this correctly. So don't skim the question is essentially what I'm trying to say. Read it very carefully, read every word, go back and read it again. Write your first draft, then go back and read it again. And make sure that your essay or your personal statement has answered each part of the question. It is very common when you're writing to get caught up in what you consider the most interesting part of the question. So you may find the first 2 questions the most interesting, and you're talking, and it's really good. But then you go back, read the question again, and you realize you haven't talked about anything related to your goals. So even though the personal statement is quite good, it's not done. And if you have already reached your character limit or your word limit, you'll have to go back and trim some of the stuff that you actually really did like in order to fit in the rest of the questions. So it's a bit of a back and forth. When I have students email me their personal statements or their essays, I always ask them to include the question, because I cannot properly edit a personal statement or essay, and I can't properly give them advice on it if I don't know what the question is. So that's a really important point, to make sure that you're looking at that really closely. And I would definitely suggest breaking down the question pretty much like I just did, so that you make sure that you are answering every part of it. Okay, so I'm not going to, hold on, go back. I'm not going to play this video because it's very long. However, I did link to it in your handout, so definitely go and watch it. It's from Purdue University. It's a really good breakdown of US applications. It's something that I do recommend you watch and you go through. It is long, and to be completely honest with you, it's boring, but it's very helpful. So it's not a snazzy video. It's one that you will have to devote your time to and devote your attention to, but it has a lot of really important points in it, so I would make sure you have a paper and a pen nearby so that you can take notes as you're watching the video. So how important is the essay? Obviously, my answer is going to be extremely important, because I wouldn't be doing a workshop about something if it wasn't important to the application process. Your essay gives the university an insight into who you are. Your personality, your interests, your goals, what's important to you. So we'll go back here. One thing that students oftentimes get a little bit frustrated about with Canadian applications is you're applying to a program and the application says, all right, I need an 85% average. In English, I need 80%. In math, I need 80%. Something to that effect. On one hand, that's really nice, because it's very obvious what they're looking for, and it's very clear whether or not you have met those requirements. But I'll have students that come back and say, well, I have an 84. I meet all the other requirements, I'm just off by 1. But I'm part of student council. I volunteer weekly. I'm an avid soccer player. I've been practicing the piano since I was 5 years old. Why don't they look into those other things about me? Those other things are not useless. They're all about creating a person who shows commitment, who shows determination, who shows motivation. Somebody who can find an activity that they're passionate about and keep up with it over an extended period of time. Somebody who can be trusted, who is responsible, and who is organized. All of these skills are extremely important for a successful university student. But for some Canadian programs, none of that matters. It's all about the numbers. So what we're noticing in the last few years is that an increasing amount of Canadian applications are actually starting to look for this stuff now. So they're taking inspiration from the UK and the US because they are realizing that it's not as simple as just saying you need an 85. Students who are doing all these amazing things out of the classroom, if somebody has an 84, but they're doing all these awesome things, versus somebody who has an 85, but is literally doing nothing else, student A might actually be a better fit for your university than student B. Because if you can do all those amazing things and still get your 84, that's pretty impressive. So there is a lot of benefits to doing this. The university can get to know who you are beyond just the numbers. They can see some insight into your values. Why are you choosing this route? You could take the easy route. You could apply to very simple universities with very low requirements, but you're choosing to do something that requires a little bit more effort on your part, a little bit more work on your part. Why are you doing this? This is all good information, and all things that will become more and more important when you move on to university. Having that kind of motivation, that kind of determination is going to be a big factor in your success. So I'm going to play you a video. It's from UCAS right now. It talks a little bit about personal statements, specifically for the UK, but I actually find it's really helpful for personal statements anywhere. I even sometimes show this video to my students who have to write essays for Canada and for the US, because it covers a lot of the information. So I'm just going to run over and play it.
It's scary. You're sitting there, there's a blank sheet of paper, it's in front of you. You've got to fill it up. You've got to talk about yourself. You've got to talk about your interest in the course. But what do you put? This is your future. It's scary. Well, nobody knows you better than you know yourself. You have the opportunity now to show why you're so much better than everybody else applying for your course. So you've got to start thinking about what makes you stand out, but stand out in a good way. I'm Jane Marshall. I work for a university. I spend my life reading personal statements. I read lots of them, and I mean lots. That means I know what makes a good personal statement and what makes a bad personal statement. You have to remember everybody's unique. There are lots of different ways of going about it. So this should get you well on the way to writing an excellent personal statement. So, where do you start? Well, the first thing you need to do is start getting words down on that blank sheet of paper. Loads of them, whatever you can think of. Why are you so excited about the course you're applying for? What is it that gets you really excited about that particular course? What floats your boat? Be excited, be positive, don't be negative. Don't say something like, I've always wanted to be a dentist because it's so much easier than being a doctor, because that isn't positive. Focus on the positives. Tell us how you got excited about this particular course. Did you read an article about something? Did it get you inspired? Did you then go and see a lecture from somebody that made you think, wow, I'm so excited, I'm going to write a project on that? That's the sort of thing we're looking for. And you can get all of this evidence from work experience, outside reading, all the sorts of things you do that back up your interest in the course. So throw those examples at the page. Get excited. Once you've got the stuff down about the course, then you've got to start thinking about the skills you've got that would help you cope with that particular course. Transferable skills, stuff like communication, essay writing, leadership, that sort of thing. And you've got to start throwing more words at the page until something sticks. If you're getting stuck, ask your friends and family. They might be able to come up with some ideas. Occasionally they don't. Avoid saying things like, I know I can be an excellent teacher because my friends tell me I'm really good at telling people what to do all the time. Because think about what that's saying about you. Then think about what's exciting about you, what makes you unique. Think of what you do that's interesting, what makes you stand out. And remember, you may not think it's interesting, but somebody else will. You might like gaming, you might like gardening, you might like train spotting. So will somebody else. So get something like that down on paper as well. So, what do you do next? You've got this big sheet of paper with all of these words on it, and you've got to get it into something resembling a personal statement. That means you've got to squash it, you've got to condense it. So you need to start off with a really punchy opening paragraph. This is the bit where you tell us how incredibly excited you are about the course you're applying for and that you really understand what it is you're getting yourself into. Then you move on to the middle paragraph. That's the chunky bit. That's full of all the evidence you're going to need to prove your interest in the particular course. You're also going to sprinkle in some of the bits about your skills and good qualities so we know you can actually do it, but that's your middle paragraph. And then you move on to the end bit, and that's the bit about the personal touch. This is the bit where you tell us you are unique. You tell us about the things you're interested in that will help you fit into university life as a whole. So, what do you avoid? Well, the first thing is verbal diarrhea. You've got to keep focused. You haven't got enough space to go off-piste, so make sure you're being relevant about the course you're applying for. That's really important. Other things to avoid, showing off. Don't be arrogant. It's absolutely fine to back yourself up using lots of relevant examples. That's called good showing off. But don't be bad showing off. That is arrogance. Avoid flowery language. Keep it to plain English. We need to understand what you're actually trying to say, so avoid the honour and the privilege of a particular work experience. Just focus on plain English. Avoid cliches. I don't want to see anybody saying, I've wanted to be a doctor ever since I was born, because you haven't. That's rubbish. Keep it to actual, normal, plain English. Copying. Don't copy. They have some software called Copycat. It will catch you if you copy somebody else's work. So they're the things you need to avoid. So, just to recap, this personal statement, you've got to show us that you know what you've applied for, you've got to show us how excited you are, you've got to give us examples. Make sure it's a combination though of head and heart. Be authentic, be focused, but be enthusiastic. That's what we're looking for. You're not going to get it right on the first go, but keep coming back to it. You'll get it right in the end, and eventually you'll have a fantastic personal statement that tells us all about you.
Okay, so the reason that I really like that video is it's not specific to the UK. The tips that are giving you there are tips that I use for students who are writing pretty much any essay that is about themselves, whether it's the UK, the US, even Canadian applications. It's simple instructions that can really help. One of the things she emphasizes there is at the beginning, it's the hardest part because you have no idea what to write. Students oftentimes feel very reluctant to start talking about themselves in an essay. It feels like you're bragging. It feels like you're talking too much about yourself. That's not something that we normally do in everyday conversation where you go up to somebody and say, I would be the best candidate to be your friend, and here's why. Like, nobody does that. But you have to do that for the university. So it's not a natural thing that you're trying to do. So when she's saying just put words on paper, I find that's one of the best pieces of advice. I know in my personal experience when I'm struggling to write something, whether it's a handout for you guys or back in university when I had to write an essay, I would always just start by just getting something, even if it's terrible. It is always easier to go back make changes, to edit, than to stare at a blank page and try to come up with something perfect right off the top of your head. So just start with that. Many of my students start by just taking a piece of paper in front of them, they don't even get a computer, and they just start writing down words. Things that they want to talk about. They're not sure how they're going to talk about it yet, but they know they're going to talk about this at some point. And then they start grouping those words into different sections. And that's how you start creating points, you start creating paragraphs, you start creating evidence. So that's one of the best places to start, because I find this starting is the hardest. So, also tips from UCAS here, but again, applicable to everything there. Why are you applying for your chosen course? So part of what I give you in your handout is a kind of a worksheet where it kind of breaks down some of the common questions that you can put some bullet points in, you can do some writing in there to make sure that you've got good options for you to talk about. Why does the subject interest you? Include evidence that you understand what is required to study the course. So if you're applying for psychology courses, if you're applying for a Bachelor of Science Psychology, show that you know how scientific that subject can be. If you're applying for a course in the UK for medicine or law, that's a very demanding subject. You have to show them that you know what you're getting yourself into. So show that you've done your research, that you understand what your course or your program is all about. Why do you think you're suitable for the courses? Do you have any particular skills and experience that will help you succeed? So this could be, like she was saying, communication skills, leadership skills, organization skills. And if you're saying you have those skills, back it up. Tell me why. Do your current or previous studies relate to the courses you have chosen? If so, how? So normally here it says CIC. If you're interested in studying a course at a university, you will take classes here that are related to your course. Not always, but most of the time that's how it works. And you can use that as evidence that one, you're starting to understand what you're getting yourself into, but two, that you've already kind of started this process. I'm interested in business. I'm taking accounting here at CIC. I'm taking marketing. I'm trying to understand the different areas of business so that when I get to university, I'm not going to be surprised by so many different areas that I can specialize in. Have you taken part in any other activities that demonstrate your interest in the course? So this could be things outside of the classroom that are related to your subject. This could also be things outside of the classroom that are leading to these skills that we were talking about earlier. So if your university is looking for leadership skills and you're part of the soccer team, you don't necessarily have to be captain of the soccer team to show leadership skills. You can show leadership in many different activities. You can talk about a time where there was a new student coming onto the team and maybe they needed help with a certain play. And that you reached out and you did something that you didn't necessarily have to do, but you wanted to bring this new student on board so that the team as a whole performed better. That's an example of leadership, but you didn't have to be the captain to do that. So start thinking about the qualities of a good leader and show where you maybe got those qualities. If they're looking for communication skills, where are you showing communication skills outside of the classroom? They know you're doing presentations inside the classroom. They know you're doing discussion groups within the classroom, but outside of the classroom, how are you developing those skills? A little bit more here. So the universities like to know the skills that you have that will help you in the course, or generally with life at university. So university is a lifestyle. Outside of the classes that you're taking at university, you're going to need a lot of independence, you're going to need a lot of motivation. If your university professor does not take attendance in your class, you're going to have to show that you have the maturity to go to class when nobody's forcing you to. Mom and dad aren't there to watch you and make sure you go. There's no university professor taking attendance, and there's no guidance department calling up mom and dad and telling them, hey, so-and-so has not been to class in a few days. You're going to have to take that responsibility on for yourself, and you want to be able to show the universities that you can handle it. Think about other achievements you're proud of, positions of responsibility that you hold or have held both in and out of the school, and attributes that make you interesting, special, or unique. Another point she made in the video that I really like is just because you don't think it's interesting doesn't mean somebody else doesn't. I have lots of students that write personal statements or essays, they bring them over to me, and I'll say, what are you talking about here? You talked about it for about a sentence and a half. This sounds really interesting. Can you tell me more about this? And they're like, oh, it's no big deal. I went to this country for a vacation during this time, and this is an experience that I had. Da, 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 da. I was like, no, Not everyone has these same experiences that you do. The admissions staff who are reading this may not have had these same experiences. Talk about everything that you think may be a little bit unique to yourself. If you're not sure, ask somebody else. Because maybe, gaming is really big with you and your friends. But it could be interesting to somebody who doesn't know you that well, as long as you talk about it in the right way. You don't want to say, oh, I play so many video games, I never get any of my homework done. Obviously, that's not a good thing to do. But you can talk about something that, this is something that I use for stress relief, and I find that it's really helpful. And I have to be careful with how much time I'm spending in it so that I make sure I have good time management skills. But it's something that allows me to decompress for a short amount of time so that when I go back into my studies, I'm that much more able to do things well because I have that little bit of a break. So it's all about how you talk about what you're doing. Hobbies and interests, social activities, think about how they demonstrate your personality, your skills, your ability. One of the best things for students to understand is universities are looking for students that fit into their universities. They're thinking of it almost like they're trying to find a good relationship. So not every person is going to fit with you. They're looking to try to find a student that will fit well. So they do want to know more about your personality. If you have work experience, you can definitely include that. It is a very impactful thing to include there, but I know a lot of our students don't have work experience, and that's okay. You can draw from your experience in other areas. So, none of you are in the UK right now or in the US right now, so you can tell these universities why you want to study there. Tell them why you think you can complete successfully a course that is taught in English. Your time here at CSE might be a good reason for that. You can tell them about your time here at CSE, that you were taught in English and you've taken any part in activities where you've used English outside of your studies. So obviously this is pretty much everything you're doing here, so it's definitely good information to include. And then your future plans. If you know what you would like to achieve after completing the course, explain how you want to use the knowledge and experience that you gained. How does the course relate to what you want to do in the future? Ultimately, the reason you're going to university is these future plans. So you want to tell them what your future plans are, what are your goals, what are your dreams, and how can that university help you get there? So, some do's and don'ts. Okay, so make sure you're using your best English. However, like she said in the video, you don't have to use flowery language. You don't want to use language that somebody may need to use a dictionary to figure out what word that is. Sometimes even the admissions staff may not have any idea what you're talking about. And there's also a risk that if you're using a word that you're not that familiar with, but you want to use it because it sounds really good, you may not use it correctly. And if the person who's reading your essay knows what that word means, they'll know you're not using it quite correctly, even if it's mostly there, but not quite. It's usually better to just stick with plain, simple English that everyone will be able to understand, but you're focusing on your spelling and your grammar to make sure that it's clear that you can study at an academic level. There was a writer, George Orwell, very famous phrase, why use a $5 word when a 5-cent one will do? So keep it simple. Show that you know your strengths and you can outline your ideas clearly. Make sure you're enthusiastic, show your passion, show your excitement. That's what they want to see in students. Make sure you do several drafts, don't just do one and send it in. You're going to make lots of changes and lots of edits throughout the whole time there. And ask people for their feedback. One thing I mentioned in a previous workshop is don't get somebody to edit extensively. You want to make sure that this is your work, these are your words. But there's nothing wrong with having somebody read it and give you some feedback on it. Just don't have them rip the whole thing apart and rewrite sections of it, that's not good. Don't exaggerate. So as much as you want to be excited and you want to be passionate, don't say things that aren't quite true, a little bit embellished. They do check. They make sure that you actually have done the things that you say you have done. We get calls here all the time at the school, checking in on what students have written in their personal statements. Student development, all the time they get calls. Don't rely on a spell checker. It doesn't pick up everything, Oftentimes words can have double meanings, and this is the kind of stuff that spell checker is just not good at. Don't rely on a machine. And don't leave it to the last minute. It will definitely seem like it's rushed, and it's just not going to be as strong. And you won't have as much time to do multiple drafts. So, some big don'ts. Don't be arrogant. Don't be offensive. You would think this would be obvious, but it's not always. Think about just sometimes how the wording works. I am the best football player in my school, or I am the best football player in the country. That's a little bit much. You can say the exact same thing by telling them that you were nominated as an MVP. You're saying the same thing, but in a very different tone. Other universities are of poor quality, and that is why I want to apply here. Don't be negative. Don't say something like that. My goal is to attend the university of so-and-so. You're saying the same thing, but in a very different tone. So I'm going to give you an example here of something that pops up, and it's just a different way that you can say essentially the same thing. So, one thing that students oftentimes talk about is their reasons for choosing the program. And so a way to say this in a way that the tone is correct is talking about yourself, your personal self. So saying something here like, my strong personal faith has been a key influence in my decision to study medicine. That is perfectly acceptable, and this is actually a really great way to start talking about your reasons for choosing the program. But you want to be very careful about sounding too forward with it. Because you have to imagine that there is somebody else on the other end who is reading this essay. They may not have the same beliefs as you do, they may not have the same opinions as you do. So you want to make sure that when you're talking about beliefs and opinions, you're making it clear that you're talking about your own. You're talking about yourself. And you can say the exact same thing, but in a different tone. So, don't use cliches. I've always had a passion for, from a young age, da, 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 da. These are the things, everybody kind of phrases these things in the same way. Do something a little bit different, be very clear. Her example of, I wanted to be a doctor since I was born, of course that's not true. Babies don't know what doctors are. Tiny children hate doctors. They give them needles. It's always bad. Nobody really wants to become a doctor until they're at least a little bit older. So just think about these things before you're saying them. Sometimes cliches, they're just things that people tend to say over and over and over again, so they become part of our natural language. But when you actually look at them and say, well, if I was taking this statement literally, would this make any sense at all? And if you realize the answer is no, then it's always good to go back and just say it in another way. The other reason we tell you to avoid cliches is that they are always somebody else's words. So a cliche is a cliche because everybody says it, and it's just become part of the cultural vernacular. This means that it's not your words. And so if you find yourself kind of falling into this trap, and it's very, very easy to do so, everybody does. I'm pretty sure I've said like 5 cliches in this workshop already. It's just a part of life. But when you're doing your edits, if you're noticing cliches in there, just think to yourself, okay, let's get rid of this part. How am I going to say this? I'm going to say it in my words. I'm not going to use a phrase that I've commonly heard from other people. Very important that the personal statement is personal. Similar to this, don't quote others. The university wants to hear from you, not somebody else. So sometimes students will start off an essay with a quotation. Sometimes they'll put it in the middle. Just avoid that if you can. It's more important that the university hears your words. If it's really important to you that this quotation is in there, if this has been a defining moment in your reason for choosing the course, okay. But keep it short, make sure you're citing it, and make sure you don't just quote it and leave it. You have to use your own words to explain its importance. But in general, find another way to say what you want to say using your own words. They may not sound as perfect as Shakespeare's, but that's okay, because they belong to you. Don't list items such as awards or achievements without stating their relevance, so just make sure you don't have a list in there. I was MVP and I was on student council and I received the highest mark in this class. Okay, that's all great, but so what? Tell me so what? Every time you make a point, every time you're talking about an achievement, tell me this so what? Why does that matter? Sometimes students are like, well, it's obvious. I had the highest mark in the class. Why wouldn't that be important to the university? They know. They want to know that you know. So explain to them. Tell them why it's relevant. Be careful about oversharing and getting extremely personal. Definitely you want to talk about your personal experiences. You want to be very clear about your goals and everything like that. But sometimes we can overshare. The best way to kind of tell this is difficult to sometimes judge on your own. Get somebody who is not very familiar with you to read the personal statement, and they can usually give you that tip back. If it could potentially make somebody else uncomfortable to read it, you want to tone it back a little bit. That doesn't mean you don't talk about it, you just maybe talk about it again in a different tone. Don't repeat items that are already stated in other parts of your application. They're going to read the entire application. The personal statement should be an opportunity for you to talk about more things, something new, something they haven't already read. And of course, don't plagiarize. The universities will definitely check. There are tons of personal statements available on the internet. They are well aware of that, and it doesn't work. This is their job. This is what they do to check. Be careful of comedy. Sometimes it doesn't always land the way you want it to. Just make sure that maybe somebody who's not familiar with you has a read through and that they understand the point that you're trying to make. Also be careful about things like sarcasm. With writing, it's not always obvious what's sarcastic and what's not, so you just have to be careful with that to make sure that you're being clear. Oftentimes the best idea is to just not do that and state what you want to state. Write what you believe, not just what you think they want to hear, and use real-world examples to strengthen your writing. For every idea you write, make sure you always answer the question, so what? Use vocabulary you are familiar with, and be real. That's probably the #1 piece of advice that I've ever heard from any university, is to be real and be yourself, because that is the only way that you will be able to create a unique personal statement. So be careful when you're showing creativity, such as using a metaphor. Again, we want to be clear, we want to make sure the other person is understanding. Make sure you're staying on topic, that you don't veer off into something, and that you're coming back to the original question that they're asking. That's why it's important to keep reading that original question every time you do a draft. Could somebody else have written the same essays as you wrote? That's a bad thing. What makes yours unique? The more personal experiences you talk about, the more unique your essay will be. And that's how you stand out. Okay, so I gave you this link here too for some US applications. I'm just going to talk a little bit about spell check and then British versus American English, just really briefly. We do have some of that information here in your handout. British and American English, different. Sometimes the words are very similar, they just have slightly different endings. When you're using your spell check, if you're in Microsoft Word or in most word processors, you can check which version that you're using. So for example, here in the corner, it'll tell you if you're using US English or UK English. Sometimes it might be already set on Canada, but be careful with Canada because like I said, we're kind of in the middle. So when you're writing something for the UK, set your word processor on UK. When you're writing for the US, set it on the US. Some of these words, they're not a big deal if you use one or the other. Sometimes they're considered interchangeable and they're fine. But for some of them, it's a big difference between the US and the UK. And so you do want to be careful so that they're not misunderstanding you or thinking that you spelled something wrong when you didn't. So, for example, favorite and color. Very different for US and UK. You're talking about the extra U's in there. Counselor. This is one of our favorites here. Counselor with one L is American. Counselor with two L's is Canadian. These are some ones that you're not going to run into very often. Recognized with an S, recognized with a Z, and that kind of thing here. So these are easy mistakes to make. And while most universities will try to be reasonable about these things, just be careful because, again, you don't want to be caught with spelling mistakes when you actually haven't technically made one. Oh, theater as well. Theater is a bit of a trick because sometimes this is American or British, just for fun. They've decided to make it complicated for you. So these are just some of the common differences between the US and the UK. With the US, it's common to do a different essay for each university, unless you're doing Common App, and then you might do the same essay or similar essays for your university choices. For the UK, every university sees the exact same essay. For the UK, make sure you're not mentioning any university in particular, because if they all see the same one, that's a really important distinction to make. So you don't want to say, oh, I really want to go to the University of Essex. I love Essex, it's my favorite university. And then you have the University of York, and they're like, oh, and they're going to be sad when they read that. They don't want to do that. Keep it vague for the UK. Make sure if you're applying to multiple programs that you're mentioning each program as well. Sometimes the US one can be less formal. It's more about telling a story. They really like to see that personal story side. The UK is more formal. It's focused more on academics. And anything that you're mentioning outside of the academics, you're linking it back into the university study and your time here. So here are some examples from the US. So describe an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself and others. So again, this is a very personal question, something you'll have to think about hard before you come up with a good answer. You can describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? Share an essay on any topic of your choice. It can be one you've already written, one that responds to a different prompt, or one of your own design. So you can see how these ones are going to be a little bit more creative than the example of the personal statement question that we read earlier in the presentation. Okay, so one thing that I do want you to work on, especially before our editing session on October 19th, but especially maybe in the next few weeks or so, is just starting to brainstorm personal statements. Working on things like choosing your activities, discussing the so what of the activity. You can use these if you can't think of a good example for yourself, use one of these examples here to just get that process started. But it's better if you can use an example of an activity that you're already doing. What skills did you develop? What did you learn from the experience? What qualities does it demonstrate? Use the personal statement worksheet that I included in the handout. It is a really helpful one to kind of get you started and get you in that brainstorming process. So within this activity, you're thinking about the skills, the qualities you're developing, your learning and knowledge, how it applies to your application to university, and how it reflects your interests and your goals. Okay. So of course, you come and see your counselor anytime you have any questions. But we also have some texts in our office that you can use. They have good examples of personal statements and of essays. They have examples of really bad ones too. So it's kind of helpful to read both sides and see what should I avoid versus what should I aspire to. These are usually examples of successful ones or unsuccessful. They're usually pretty clear with you which way it goes. Just so that you can see real world examples. These are actual essays that have been handed into universities and the students gave permission for them to be published. Although with the bad ones, I'm kind of surprised about that, but apparently it's true. So that other people can learn from them. So it's a really good resource. It's really helpful to read through it. But also all the links that I gave you towards the end of your handout will have a lot of information here as well. So these are just some of the links that I gave you. And some of these I actually just printed off, like the worksheet, for example. They're all of varying lengths. Some of them will take you a while to get through. Some of them are really quick reads. It all just depends on how far you want to get into this. So what's next? Friday, October 19th, we have the personal statement editing session. So if you have what you think is a pretty strong personal statement by that point, come in for the workshop. We'll take a look. We'll give you some feedback. You're always welcome to contact me as well if you'd like me to take a look at your personal statement if this date doesn't work for you. I usually suggest that students send me an email and you send me a soft copy of your personal statement. I like to spend at least a day or two with it to make sure that I'm really taking a strong look at it. And then I'll book you an appointment where the two of us can come in and we can have a good conversation. I find that if you bring it to me in person and you want me to read it right there and give you feedback, I can't get as far into it as I would like. I can't spend the time with it. My advice isn't as strong that way. So I do like to spend at least a day just so that I make sure that I'm giving you the best possible advice that I can. So preferably it would be a final draft, but I know that that might be asking a bit much in October, so don't worry. As long as you feel like it's a really strong version and you're really quite happy with it. By this point, I would also suggest that you have finalized your university choices and working on the other parts of the application. If you're applying for January deadlines, you should really be as far along in the process as you can be. Keep in mind the UCAS CIC deadline, December 3rd. So at this point, you really want to have been as far along as you can be at that point. If you're not completely done though, it's still okay, you still have time. Just make sure that you're scheduling time to work on this. What you're going to find is the closer you get to the end of the semester, the busier you will get. You'll have final projects in your classes, you'll have exams coming up. These applications take a lot of time. So the earlier you can start working on them, the earlier you can get as far as possible in them. It'll make your life easier towards the end of this semester. It can be very overwhelming to start these applications at the same time that you're doing all your final projects and studying for your exams. So we try to push this as early as we can, although keep in mind the deadlines are a little bit later. Okay, so conclusion here. A strong essay or personal statement lets the admissions office know who you are. Your grades, your SAT scores, any of this stuff lets them know elements of who you are. How well do you do in the classroom? But that's only a small section of who you really are as a person. University applications are a time when students start to think and dream about their future. Your essay or personal statements lets the admissions office into these thoughts and dreams and lets them see you as a whole person, not just a list of grades and test scores. This is a great opportunity, and I encourage you to use the opportunity to tell them something real about yourself and to be honest about your goals. Let them see you as an individual and as somebody who they think would add something to their university campus. Okay? So, if there's any questions, I will be up here at the front. Otherwise, thank you for your time, and I'll see you in October.